Hello, welcome to session number 5, Adventures in the Sky at IEEE Summit on Communications Futures 2021. I am Halim Yanukomeroğlu from Carleton University in Canada. Let me start by sharing my screen first. Now, full screen mode. Yes, the topic for this session is high altitude platform station networks of 2030s and 2040s. I will have an introduction to UAV base stations and then LEO mega constellations. And the core topic today is HAPS systems. And I will conclude by some observations and remarks. The radio access network has been evolving steadily over decades, with so many enhancements and most recently 5G Open RAN. However, the expectations are a moving target. No matter how RAN evolves, it is still not agile enough. And as a researcher who has been working in this area since my master's for 30 years now, it occurred to me several years ago that no matter what we do, the terrestrial network will not cut it. So it was for the first time in 2010-15 ICC in a tutorial that I was giving, I started talking about an integrated terrestrial aerial network that is a terrestrial network compounded with UAV base stations for on-demand capacity injection when the demand is not predictable. It might appear where the supply is not present. So here we are not talking about an alternative to the terrestrial network, rather an add-on. The brute force solution in RAN is to put an access point everywhere, but that is economically prohibitive. And I am happy to see that within less than 5 years, in 3GPP release 17, this concept has been endorsed as UXNB. LEO mega constellations is a very hot topic. It goes without saying. Starlink is always having media coverage. Today we have Iridium network working for several years, and it is good to be reminded that it has only 66 satellites. Now compare that with Cooper or Starlink, which will have thousands of satellites, if not tens of thousands of satellites. However, LEO mega constellations have some problems. Here I will highlight 3 major problems. The first one is due to the high path loss, LEOs do not talk to UEs directly. Even if this becomes possible for low-rate applications, it is difficult for high-rate applications. So, for instance, antenna technologies will advance. We will have steerable beamforming and so on. So that will ease the stress on path loss. So UEs can reach, or LEOs can reach to UEs, but the user expectation goes to the next level. In 2030s, we will be talking about XR and things of that sort. So it is always behind in that sense. Also, LEOs orbit, and due to this fact, tracking is needed on the ground. You see UFO on a stick concept of Starlink. Besides, the challenges due to orbiting, like handoff, routing, addressing, are quite major. And last but not least, LEOs do not have sufficient capacity. This may not be very obvious, but let us make a comparison. Take China as an example. There are about 5 million base stations in China today, and that number can double or triple in the next 10 years. In comparison, Starlink will have about 12,000 satellites when it is complete. China's area is about 2% of the area of the globe, which means that at any given time there will be about 250 satellites on China. Now compare that number, 250, to 10 or 15 million base stations of the terrestrial network. The situation in big cities is even worse for satellites. Shanghai, for instance, a mega city with 25 million people, and it is served by an extremely dense terrestrial network. However, at any given time, there would be, say, about a dozen satellites in the skies of Shanghai. So the bottom line is satellite networks cannot compete with terrestrial networks in metro, that is the densely populated areas. And due to this reason, both in the past and present as well as in the near future, there is a separation of use cases. Satellite networks target rural and remote areas, and terrestrial networks are mainly in urban and suburban areas. Therefore, although we have been talking about integrated terrestrial satellite networks for a very long time, it has never happened because there is really no pressing need. These are different markets. Now, I see a rather big problem in front of the satellite industry. These mega constellations probably will cost around $50 billion, although the estimates by Cooper and Starlink are much more modest. I think when they are finished, the number will be around $50 billion. And revenue in rural and remote areas is limited. So in this decade, I think the business case is questionable. The companies, satellite companies, will target break-even scenarios. And some of them, especially the legacy players in the satellite industry, may not survive. However, I shouldn't sound pessimistic. I believe especially the newcomers with new technologies like SpaceX's Starlink and Amazon's Cooper, Google, and perhaps even Apple might be in this business. They are different in the sense that they have deep pockets, so they can survive even if they do not have a real return from their investment of tens of billions of dollars. And as they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I think in 2020 is lots of valuable know-how will be accumulated, and whichever companies in this business survive and make it to 2030s, they will make a comeback in a very strong manner, and they will target metro areas where the money is. Let us move to HAPS systems. Here is the ITU definition. These are objects or aircrafts at altitudes 20 to 50 kilometers above the ground. And the most important feature of them is they are, for all practical purposes, static. They are fixed relative to the Earth. HAPS have decades of history, and I will present this history and future in terms of generations. Pretty much up to Loon project, say mid-2015s, everything I bundle as zeroth generation. There was no commercial deployment, a lot of activities, but pretty much all of them experimental. The game really started by Google's Loon project. It has already some limited commercial deployments in rural and remote regions, again, not in metro regions. I think that those deployments will increase in the coming years. And the main type of aircraft is balloon. And then second generation HAPS systems, this is the next generation, 2025, 2035 timeframe. Now we are talking about much more advanced aircrafts in the form of fixed wing aircrafts or Zeppelin type of aircrafts. And it is likely that we will see widespread deployments in rural and remote regions. The most interesting part is next generation, that is the 3G in HAPS systems, 2010-35 and beyond. In that era, we will see deployments, or likely to see, these are all predictions which are risky, but we will most likely see deployments in metro regions. And we are now talking about much more advanced aircrafts, airships in the size of International Space Station on dense areas. Very quickly let us recap. HAPS systems have advantages over LEO mega constellations. For instance, they are scalable. You can just launch a few of them as necessary. They are part of the cellular ecosystem, therefore it is evolutionary. They are geostationary, closer to Earth, which means path loss is less, latency is less, and link budget is much more favorable, and they are legislation friendly. In my recent publications, for instance, this magazine paper, which will appear soon, I call this construct HAPS-based super macro base station, akin to a small base station, macro base station, and then the next level is super macro base station. It is the third tier in the HETnet architecture. I also call that a vertical HETnet. The footprint can be small if we need capacity. It can be large if we need coverage. The frequencies might be both sub 6 gigahertz to reach indoors, but also millimeter wave up to 100 gigahertz actually in outdoors, and the backhauling can be free space optical. So the aggregate rates can reach to terabits per second level. Still, terabits per second is too little to give coverage to a large city. Therefore, the capacity of super macro base station should be utilized in a very careful way. These super base stations can provide coverage to temporary hotspots through beamforming or IoT applications, or they can backhaul small cells. Applications are many actually. One very, well, before that, I should mention, as I already alluded to, beamforming will play a very important role in these next generation HAPS networks. They will be instrumental in smart megacities of the future. With IoT and AI, this mega base station on the skies of smart cities will be one of the key enablers. These constructs are very suitable to give coverage to major highways. It is an enabler for intelligent transportation systems. Example, take Canada. There is Trans-Canada Highway from Atlantic to Pacific, 5,500 kilometers. If there is a coverage by a chain of HAPS constellations or HAPS nodes, then 95% of the population is actually covered as well automatically. HAPS can give service to aerial highways, cargo drones, and if you put an atomic clock, it can be instrumental in localization, navigation, and positioning, which are all critical in megacities. The management and control of HAPS networks and integrated vertical HETnet architecture with HAPS super macro base stations included is less than straightforward. That should be acknowledged. AI and ML will play a key role. We have a network of networks. Let me conclude with some remarks. I have a proposal to Starlink and Cooper. There is already big investment by deploying 10,000 or more LEO satellites just for rural and remote communities. My proposal is let us complement that with 1,000 high altitude platform station macro, super macro base stations. Maybe this will double the investment, but with those 1,000 HAPS, it is possible to reach 2 billion people in the metro areas. And let us remember once again, that is where the money is. So HAPS nodes can act as relay and to the satellite networks, and it can hide all the problems about orbiting of the satellite networks. At that time, we can talk about a truly integrated satellite aerial terrestrial access network architecture. So HAPS networks will evolve. On top of a city, we can put a HAPS super macro base station. It will, at some point, will have a massive MIMO capability with FSO backhauling. If it is difficult to have massive MIMO and corresponding signal processing in single HAPS, then we can construct HAPS clusters or constellations in big cities. They can serve many purposes. In addition to access, they can backhaul small cells, can give coverage to aerial and terrestrial highways. They can have some data center capabilities as well, caching and mobile edge computing, for instance. And these clusters can be connected to clusters in the skies of other cities, as well as to the satellite network. So this is actually, even the term super macro base station is not sufficient to capture the magnanimity here. So I call it hyper macro base station for 2040s. Now, one big question is energy. A typical 5G base station uses a bit over 10 kilowatt of power. The envisioned HAPS systems will require much more power than a regular 5G base station, because this is a super or hyper macro base station. The possibilities include tethering to the ground, or remote charging, or nuclear power. However, all of these are a little bit eccentric and may be difficult to realize for a variety of reasons, including policy and safety. Battery technologies are evolving. Lithium-ion batteries are now very advancing very rapidly, thanks to Tesla, actually. And in the future, we might have even more advanced battery technologies like fluoride-ion batteries. My best bet is actually similar to aerial refueling, battery replacement. This is a big infrastructure investment on a regular basis, maybe on a daily or a few times a day, or maybe once in few days. I am not sure about the regularity at the moment, but a special aircraft can bring a new battery and take the old ones back to the ground. I started thinking about HAPS systems back in 2017-18 for backhauling the small cells. This is my first publication back from 2018, which has been very well received in the literature. But since then, in the last year, my group has produced quite many position papers on different use cases for HAPS. Some of them have already been accepted. This communication surveys and tutorials paper, when appear, it will be the most comprehensive HAPS paper in the literature. I also have a YouTube channel with some videos. Thank you very much. If you are interested in this construct, drop me an email. We will take it from there. Enjoy the rest of the conference.